if you're working with a remote team, you need to have camera time with them regularly. I'm not sure what regularly looks like for you. For me, I've got 5 remote teams. We've got a weekly Teams call that we're together every week for at least an hour. And I would assume that good leaders recognize part of our leadership is accomplished in those meetings. Cameras on, microphones off mute. We're all fully engaged, and you get to hear from Chris. You get to hear from Andy. Andy gets to hear from you. Chris gets to hear your perspective.
Hey, everybody. Chris G here. It's time for another episode of the Hard Hat to CEO. Guess what we're going to talk about today? We're going to talk about leadership. Now, I talk about having a team all the time, but you don't have a team unless you got a leader. That's just the cold, hard facts. And I got a friend here, Andy Neillie, all the way from Austin, Texas. And we're going to talk about leadership today. He is a trainer and a coach. And please help me welcome Andy. How you doing?
I'm doing well. Honored to be with you. Looking forward to a good conversation, Chris.
Thank you. Is it hot down in Austin today?
It is hot. Unfortunately, the summer heat came in a couple of weeks early, and we're experiencing early summer heat wave.
Well, we had here in Missouri, it changes all the time. As if you live here, you know, but we had a heat wave last week, and this week I'm wearing sweatshirts, and who knows what's going to be this weekend. So, anyway. So, Andy, before we get started, can you tell me a little bit about yourself and how you got into the leadership coaching thing?
Well, there's a great construction story. My faith is really important to me. I became a follower of Jesus when I was a young child. Don't come from a church home, but God chose me. And I grew up reading these gospel stories of the best servant leader. And then one of my first jobs in high school and through college was working a construction crew. And Chris, I had a bad boss. I had a boss who had anger management issues. And in fact, if he had a hand tool in his hand and you were nearby when he lost it, you better move quickly. And so I'm reading about this servant leader who sacrificed himself. And then I'm out on a job site with a guy that's got anger management issues. And I just realized this isn't right. And at some level that awakened in me kind of this sense of injustice. Nobody should work for a bad boss. And one thing led to another. I wish I could tell you I was really strategic about launching the Neillie Leadership Group. I wasn't strategic. People have told me for years that you're a good communicator, Andy. So I used my communication capabilities and then my passion around nobody should work for a bad boss. And you put those together, and 25 years later, the Neillie Leadership Group has got 5 million frequent flyer miles from flying around the globe, working with people to become better. Our tagline is we turn managers into leaders. And it all started through my faith and through a bad boss on a construction site.
Well, that bad boss, not even the manager, in my opinion. And I've told other people, why people are contractors? That's because they can't work for anybody else. And that, I know some people like that, and that's not true, obviously, but you can find that in any industry. Bad managers, bad bosses, all that good stuff. But I'm glad that you're helping others become leaders.
Hope so.
Tell me your definition of a leader.
Well, it's a great question. Leaders and managers are not two different things, Chris, but they're not identical. And if there was an easy way to define the difference that I see in effective leaders, is managers are all about the things and some about the people. Leaders are more about the people while they still are focused on the task as well. So I think that's a working definition. But for all of us, Chris, it's a working definition. None of us ever arrive on this leadership journey. It's a series of commas. It is never a period if you're working at becoming a high-performing leader.
You need both? What I mean is, do you need two individuals to do both, or do you have one individual that knows when it's time to manage and knows when it's time to lead?
Yeah. That's a great question. You and I could talk for the next 30 minutes about that specifically. Some of your clients use the EOS model, that enterprise operating system model, and they very clearly talk about, the visionary leader, and then was it Chris, the integrator? Yeah, the integrator, I think. Yeah. And the integrator is kind of the person who makes sure things gets done. The most effective organizations I've worked with, you don't have a visionary leader that's at the 10,000 foot level and doesn't have any clue with what's going on day to day. They're a combination of both. They don't micromanage, but the best leaders see everything without saying everything. I think it's a combination of both.
You mentioned managers. What turns them into a leader?
Yeah.
Or how do you get them to transition?
I mean, that's the $1 million question. That's what's
That's
had me
what they pay you
struggle.
for?
Well, or that's at least what I've been trying to figure out for the last
Right.
25 years. And I've got a simple model, Chris. Simple doesn't mean easy, but I'm pretty convinced when I look at folks that are both good managers and good leaders, they're engaged in what I've labeled the 4 leadership necessities. These are people that are people of conviction. They see the bigger picture. They know the why and not just the what. They have their eyes up. They think broader. They think bigger. They think further down the road. They're people of conviction and strategy and vision. Secondly, they're people of competence, and this takes us back really to the management side. A good leader is helping their people execute better. They're providing the training, the resources, the tools, the accountability, the delegation. They're people of competence. The third one, and Chris, somebody from Missouri, this is going to be in your blood. It's that character piece, right? Managers who are becoming high-performing leaders, they're people. No, they're fair-minded, they're honest, they're other-oriented, they're not anger management case victims, they're people rich in character. And then the fourth necessity, I couldn't quite get my language around what I was observing, but it finally dawned on me maybe 3 or 4 years ago. The best leaders I was working with, Chris, they were in covenant with their team members. Now, covenant is kind of an old-fashioned word, but I would assume in Missouri, here in Texas where I live, marriage covenant would be a great example. A marriage covenant, it's love and affection and romance and the wedding and forever and ever, amen. There's a personal side of this concept of covenant. Unless you get married, you may not realize there's also a legal document that's signed by an officiant and recorded with the county clerk. Covenant is both a personal and a formal relationship. And that was the final ingredient with me when I saw, that's what these leaders are doing. It's Andy is working for Chris and Andy's a good worker. He's used up all of his PTO this week or this year, but his dad needs to be moved into a memory care center. And Andy needs 2 weeks to go back home and manage that transition. And somehow Chris figures out how to make it happen. It goes beyond HR. It's outside policy, but Andy needs it, and Chris, his boss, makes it happen. And as a result, Chris creates tremendous loyalty in the Andys out there, conviction, or covenant. So I haven't come up with anything new. There's nothing new in leadership since Jesus Christ and Marcus Aurelius 2,000 years ago. But this simple model, the 4 leadership necessities, Chris, I think if you've got managers that are wondering, am I becoming a high-performing leader? If they're working in those 4 areas, they're on their way.
In your example, and I truly appreciate it. We used to back in the corporate years, I ran a business and 150 employees, and it's easier to let on smaller groups. It's easier to be more personable.
Yeah.
Now I'm not saying there's not contractors out there that don't have 150 employees, but it's hard to do because everybody has their opinion. Everybody has, well, you're treating him unfair, blah blah blah. And those are things that I think if it does come up that, and you're going to work at your example, you're going to work it out with that guy.
Yeah.
Make an SOP, a standard operating procedure. So that way, here's what you and this gentleman agreed on. And that way, if it ever comes up again, you got a document. This is what we did last time, and that's what you're willing to do for the next person. And I know it changes a lot, and those aren't easy decisions. But
well, and part of what we have to do as leaders is make sure our team members understand what fair is. Chris, if you and I negotiated that you're going to pay me $75,000 a year for this job, and somebody else has the same job, but they're in a different market, and you're paying them $100,000 a year, but I've agreed to $75,000 while they're in Houston where cost of living is higher, and so they need $100,000. If you've agreed with them for that and you've agreed with me, I have to remember that my relationship with you is fair, even if they're being paid more. What's fair is between you and me. I suspect I saw you nodding. You and I've had I've had many hard conversations with employees where it's like, you know what, this is what you and I agreed to. Your job is not to worry about what I did for that person. It's, am I treating you fairly? And
would you like would you like to move to Houston,
Yeah.
Texas?
Would you like to move to New
And
York
then
where
we can talk about, yeah, we can talk about your
$5,000
pay
a month?
there, but
Exactly. Yeah.
so,
Yeah. But it's a challenge, right? I mean, that's one of
oh
the
yeah,
points that I think, everybody wants to be a leader. Even if you have the title manager, you want to think of yourself as a leader. Chris, there are times when you and I are wondering, why would anybody want to be a leader? All of the easy conversations get handled lower. Leaders get the hard conversations. Leaders are self-sacrificial. Leaders are the ones that they don't get to be paid until everybody else is paid. Why would anybody want to be a leader other than it's the most satisfying job in the world? But
right.
leaders,
That's it.
we're at the bottom of the pyramid. We're not at the top of the pyramid.
When you look at it, that's right.
Yeah, yeah.
What?
And that's part of what really worries me in the 2020s we live in. I think there's a whole misunderstanding that celebrity influencers are leaders. There's nothing in common between a leader and somebody that's got 10,000 followers on TikTok. It's leadership is invisible when it's done well.
There's not. They could take advantage. A good leader could take advantage of, if they were a celebrity, could take advantage of that.
Yeah,
But doesn't necessarily mean that just because they're
yeah,
famous doesn't make them a good leader by no
no,
means.
exactly right. Yeah,
Tell
they're
me,
not mutually exclusive, but one doesn't lead to the other naturally.
correct. Tell me how a leader not imposes, maybe express, or talk about their values and how they
Yeah, yeah,
share
I
their
mean,
values with others to make sure they got the right team with them.
yeah. I mean, particularly that's such a great question in our current economy because it's rich in choice for employees and team members, and getting people to come and stay and grow with you is probably one of the biggest challenges of leadership. Why should I be loyal to Chris when somebody will pay me another $1 an hour down the street? And, part of that is, I believe, found in these 4 leadership necessities. When you are a person of character, when you're giving people what they need so that they can execute their job well, when you're in covenant with them, where it's personal as well as professional. But I'm of the opinion, Chris, that this is at least as challenging an employment environment as you and I've ever seen in my career, because I've got a whole bunch of theories. I think social media has created a sense of dissatisfaction amongst all of us. We just look at our smartphone and realize what we don't have and who we are and what we don't look like. And there's got to be greener grass someplace else. And I think that percolates over into a whole bunch of places, including the job site and the workforce.
I agree. And it's not even you don't even have to be a certain age. I mean, sometimes that social media, which I use a lot, that's what this is going to go on, can be positive and negative.
Although I'm always very careful because I don't want to get pigeonholed. I've got a daughter that is the current generation, and she blasts me regularly when I pigeonhole people. And then, Chris, I will tell you, I was working with a light manufacturer in Northeast Tennessee a couple years ago, and the leadership team, one of the managers I was working with, he had 17-year-olds and 70-year-olds on his team. People are extending retirement age.
Sure.
They're still young and energetic. They want to keep working. They're not where they need to be financially. So he said, it's not a matter of any one specific generation. He said, part of my challenge is I got to figure out how to work with the baby boomers, the World War II legacy or the Vietnam War legacy. And then I got to help a kid who's never shown up 5 days in a row, 8 hours a day. This is his very first job. I've got to manage them all. That's
Absolutely.
why, part of why I want to give credit to people that are effective managers and leaders in the 2020s. I think the challenges are as great as they've ever been.
This kind of rolls in somewhat into human resources, but I think a good leader, even a good manager, you got to train your people.
Yeah.
And an example, in Tennessee, did they have did the 70-year-olds work with the 24-year-olds?
Yeah. They did. And part of their frustration was this, this idiot doesn't know anything. And of course, 53 years ago, when you were 17, you might not have known anything either.
Exactly.
But Chris, I do think, I have a pet theory that 2007 was the beginning of a new age. That's the year the iPhone first came out. And while there were smartphones before that, that really
Right.
was the age when social media started taking off. And I think people's expectations grew, our addiction to these devices grew, our dissatisfaction with our world grew because we saw how beautiful and smart and strong and rich everybody else was compared to us, and all those false narratives that I think, they've created a world of Karens and Kevins out there, and we have to work with all of them.
In the previous episode I had, I was talking to a gentleman, and we were talking about just it wasn't necessarily leadership, but it was owning a business and having loyalty from your employees. And he was looking at it from one perspective, and he thought maybe he wasn't doing as good a job as he tried, but he didn't know how good a job he was doing. And then later on, they sold the business, and he met one of his old employees, and they were saying how much they looked up to him as the homeowner. So my question is, how do you know, or how do you teach your people to know that they're doing a good job being a leader?
Yeah. Well, very practically, in my small business, we do twice a year employee surveys
Mhm.
that are totally anonymous, and every manager's team, those surveys come directly to me. So they don't have to worry about it. My boss is going to find out what I'm really saying. So there's just that very practical thing. And then I work really hard at creating an environment where my management team knows that we work on weaknesses together. One of our core values is submit to strengths and protect weaknesses. And if I have a manager who is willing to grow, man, I am on their side of the table. Rarely am I on the other side of the table, as long as they're willing to grow. And so, Chris, that whole, the Four Leadership Necessities, the character piece of that, every good leader needs to recognize I am chief culture officer, whether I want to be or not. And the owners of these businesses and the leaders of the businesses need to realize my job is to invest in my people, believing they will invest in our profits. Now, it's easy for you and me to agree to that on a podcast.
Yeah.
I know how hard that is. My wife and I have lain in bed at night when I said, honey, we can't get paid again this month because I needed to make sure our team got paid. And been there, done that, right? And that's, again, why would anybody want to be in charge?
On your surveys, do you get 100% participation?
Hard to get 100% participation.
I didn't know how that. Yeah, I agree. I didn't know how. Not that
Yeah.
I was downplaying.
Yeah.
I was just wondering. So you get participation. That's good. And
Yeah.
then, because I'm thinking, I used to do some surveys, but as a leader now, if I wasn't told, hey, a client of mine's go interview and survey your people, do you get stuff back that just don't make any sense
Yeah,
sometimes?
you do. Yeah. And you have to wade through that, right? What you're looking for are
Mhm.
trends. If you can get 80% survey respondents, and then you look for trends. And, on the one hand, you try to make the survey easy. We use that NPS survey that's out there that anybody can access online. It's got 10 or 12 questions. And so it'll give you like a dashboard of answers. I agree very much. I agree. I'm indifferent. I don't agree. But then, Chris, obviously, always the most important stuff is the comments that your employees leave at the end. And you're right.
Sure.
Some of them you could tell that person's just got a burr in their saddle, but you're looking for the consistent. What are some repeating trends? One of the managers that I'll be doing an annual review with later this week, she's great at a bunch of things, and she struggles with time management. She shows up late at times. She and she doesn't have a direct boss on site with her every single day. Well, that's the one thing that came out in her surveys is, she's great, and sometimes we don't know where she's at. Well, we're going to talk about that, and one of the areas she needs to grow is, man, if your team doesn't know where you're at, you haven't done a good job, and you need to be above reproach in this area. She's got a number of other things that we're going to celebrate, and that's going to be an area that she needs to grow.
Talk about ego a little bit. And I'm assuming some egos would not even call to bring you on. But you ever dealt with some that are egos that, I like telling stories, that they think it's the other people and it's really them? What I'm talking about the king that the naked king or something. You ever heard of that?
Yeah.
No
The
clothes.
Emperor's
King with no
clothes.
clothes.
That's right.
Yeah. So
Chris,
you ever had those that they hire you and then you realize it's not them, it's the one that hired you?
So, we all have those horror stories, right? And you made me think about one more than 10 years ago now. I was hired by some senior execs at an organization to go and work at a number of their locations to do this. I have a half-day workshop called the Four Leadership Necessities. It includes a online self-assessment if we want to extend it out to a date. At any rate, I'm working with this team. The frontline manager stood up at the beginning of the day and say, hey, we got this guy here. Senior management is making us do this. I'm not a real fan of this type of stuff, but we got to give him at least an hour. If this isn't worth your time, let's give him an hour and then let's get back out in the field. And then he turned it over to me. It's like, Now, here's the good news, Chris. We ended up staying together the entire day. I had all kinds of positive compliments, and 8 months later, that guy was gone. But in the moment, it's like, oh, geez, how do I even follow that, right? The very type of leadership I'm talking about, you just became like an anti-mentor for your entire team about what we're going to be talking about for the next 8 hours. So, yeah, I think we've all got those horror stories, don't we?
Yeah. Now, I don't know the percentage, but I know that some of my contractors, clients, listeners are family-owned businesses. How do you deal with them?
Yeah. We talked earlier about leaders have the hard conversations. For family-owned businesses, those are some of the hardest conversations because dad and son or parents and kids have a conversation at the dining room table. That's the hardest conversation of all. I mean, you and I both know there's two, unfortunately, bad statistics for family-owned business. Typically, they don't make it through the second generation. And typically they're not sellable. That's just the reality. In fact, my financial advisor was sharing with me a story a couple of years ago. He said, Andy, when they work with small privately held businesses, family-owned businesses, he said, you need to pull enough cash out of your business to retire because you're probably never going to be able to sell your business and your kids probably aren't going to be able to support you. So you need to pull enough cash out over a 10 or 15-year period to fund your retirement. So that's just the harsh reality that you and I try to live in. Can you and I come in and coach and counsel and help them manage those transitions? I believe we can, but the statistics are tough.
I was interviewed, this has been about a month ago, and she has a HVAC company that they got from mom and dad and their siblings. Now, dad's still part of it. I guess mom is too, but the siblings are running the show. And one of the things they've done is that it's a good idea. They clearly define who's responsible for what. That's almost now. They said at first they didn't, and they brought in a consultant as well, and that's what's like. You got to be clear and understand.
Yeah.
And it's harder with being siblings because and everybody realizes this. You see these people on holidays and weekends. At least an employee who they get to go home at night. They get to go.
Yeah. You don't need to know what kind of beer they drink after hours. So
exactly.
And while I bemoan those statistics that say most second generation businesses don't survive and most privately held family businesses aren't sellable, there are some great successes. We've got a plumbing company here in Austin, Texas that is renowned in Austin, Texas for they're a multi-generation business, and every new generation the business has grown. And that's just, there's a neat, beautiful legacy, Chris. If you and I were doing this podcast 150 years ago, the only businesses we'd be talking to were family-owned businesses.
Absolutely. And as a matter of fact, the one I was referring to, they've grown since they brought it on. Everybody
Yeah.
does their thing, and they realize, and you have to realize sometimes it's like, listen, we're going to agree to disagree,
Yeah. Yeah.
but this is my area of agreement that I'm supposed to be responsible for. I'm meeting the criteria that we've agreed to, and we're going to move on.
Yeah.
The
I
is there
worked
a
with a fuel and lubricant company recently where the 5th generation family member had a seat at the table. We were doing some strategic planning. And the thing that really encouraged me, Chris, is he was indeed the smartest guy at the table. And he was not a slacker. And I thought, man, one, he was raised well, and two, he's taken it upon himself to raise the bar. So, it happens.
It
Yeah.
can very well.
Yeah. Yeah.
Is there a certain amount of people that a business should be a size of? And I know we're in the world of corporations that are huge.
Yeah.
I read one time, this has been years ago, and I could see it, that the magic number was 150
Yeah.
or less.
Yeah.
And the thought was, if you got to 150, which is not to say don't grow, but open another building and start building it up to 150.
Well, it's interesting that number came from this British researcher. It's called the Dunbar number, and
Okay.
it talks about the circle of 3, the circle of 5, the circle of 15, the circle of 50, and the circle of 150. And part of that circle of 150 was
Okay.
you as the CEO or me as the owner of the business. While I won't know everybody in the plant deeply, I can keep 150 people. I'll recognize them. They'll recognize me. You get bigger than that, and all of a sudden there's so many layers that you never really interact with them. So here's the other thing I know. I've worked with management teams for years, and the best hands-on managers, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, you can't really daily hands-on manage more than 8 to 10 people. You can supervise them, but you can't really work alongside them and delegate and train and hold accountable and encourage and develop. There's just not enough hours in the day for a single manager to manage more than a team of I think the ideal numbers that I talk about a lot of times are 7 to 11.
So can you lead more than 150? Can't manage, but can you lead more than 150?
Yeah, I think so. As you think about those 4 leadership necessities,
And then
vision,
you have
yeah, you just got to have people underneath you, right? You've got to have your team that then leads their team well. But can you continue to demonstrate those 4 leadership necessities, one with your direct team, and make it part of the culture of your organization? I've got about 175 people working for me in our multi-unit business these days. Truth of the matter is, Chris, I don't know a lot of them because we're in multi-units, but I know their managers. And when I've trained their managers well, their managers have invested our culture and our core values so that their shift people that I've never met reflect the Kool-Aid that I want everybody to be pouring.
as we talk, trying to be humble. Obviously, I try to do a good job, and this is more of a question for myself almost. And I know some of the answers, but the question is, how do you articulate? What's the best way to articulate to your team your vision?
Yeah.
Because I got it all up here, and sometimes what comes out of my mouth isn't what it's all running all the time, And I'm sure a lot of entrepreneurs are the same way. You're always thinking about something.
Yeah.
And you think
Boy,
you
you're
can
asking
explain
some
it.
good questions. Yeah. Yeah.
Recommendations there.
Yeah. I mean, I think 2 things come to my mind. One is, you're the leaders that are dialing in, listening to you, Chris, they just need to know, they need to have some core values, and beat those core values to death. I worked with a team early last year, and one of their core values was, we want to win. At the same time, I was working with another team, and he said, I got 2 core values. I want to be number 1 or number 2 in every market I serve, and I want to be the employer of choice for the people in my markets. So there was 2 different approaches. The one was, we want to win. These are all we're expecting are high performers. I want people that love to work 60 and 70-hour weeks and win at everything. The other one was, I want to be the employer of choice in my markets. And neither one of those was right or wrong. It just attracts a different kind of person. So that's the first thing. Be clear about your core values. And then the second thing, Chris, is everybody that's in a leadership position needs to recognize They are chief communication officer. They've got to be communicating regularly. I write a weekly one-page Andy's Axiom that I distribute to all of our facilities. That's thought leadership. That's why we're doing what we're doing and how it's important. It's success stories I hear about. It's challenges we've overcome. And I drip, 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 and it goes into every one of our facilities. And, I think probably for the frontline workers, some of them don't even read Andy's Axiom. Others remember one from a month and a half ago, but it's my opportunity to drip, drip, drip on a consistent basis. Chief Communication Officer. Every leader needs to recognize that's part of their job.
Before we wrap up, Andy, I have another thought, and it's from the notes I've got here. I have a virtual assistants team. I work with virtual assistants. I don't know if you do or not, but one of the things how do you manage or even lead virtual teams when they're not in the same room with you?
Yeah. I mean, if this concept of chief communication officer means anything, it means I got to be communicating virtually as well. The good news is in the last 5 years, we've all become more agile with Google Meets, with Zoom, with WebEx, with Teams. And one of the things I kind of get up on my soapbox about is, there is this movement in many industries, death to meetings. The fewer the meetings, the better. We don't want to waste anybody's time. Leaders, part of what you and I need to recognize is we oftentimes do our most important work in meetings. Be brief, be bright, have an agenda, but if you're working with a remote team, you need to have camera time with them regularly. I'm not sure what regularly looks like for you. For me, I've got 5 remote teams. We've got a weekly Teams call that we're together every week for at least an hour. And I would assume that good leaders recognize part of our leadership is accomplished in those meetings. Cameras on, microphones off mute. We're all fully engaged, and you get to hear from Chris. You get to hear from Andy. Andy gets to hear from you. Chris gets to hear your perspective.
Well, Andy, if somebody wanted to reach out to you and bring you over to help them be a better leader, how would they get hold of you?
Well, Neillie Leadership Group, and the good bad thing, Chris, is my last name is not as easy to spell as Gilman, but if you get it right, you'll find me because I'm the only one. Neillie, NeillieLeadership.com. And I've got a little tab on the top. If somebody wants to grab 15 minutes with me on a phone call, I'd be honored to do that. The other thing, Chris, we talked about the importance of leaders being effective communicators. I've got a little 8-page ebook on the 3 imperative leadership conversations: how to hold a hard conversation, what you and I talked about for a few minutes, how to hold a coaching conversation, and how to hold a 3-fold affirmation conversation. If somebody simply goes to leadershipmaterials.com, they can sign up for that, download that ebook. There's templates, there's worksheets. The leadershipmaterials.com will also get them connected to me.
Awesome. As always, down in the show notes below, there'll be a link to Andy's stuff, as well as a link to my free breakthrough session. If you have one, that if you enjoyed what we talked about today and want to become a better leader or work with your business to become a CEO and not a hard hat, that's where you go. And as always, join the Facebook group, Hard Hat CEO, where you get great information and that you might not get here. So, Andy, thank you very much. It's been a pleasure.
My pleasure, Chris. Great conversation. Great conversation.
All right, everyone, we'll see you next week on the Hard Hat CEO. Bye-bye.